Hello, viewers and listeners. This is your co-host Stu, and I'm here with the paranormalist Patty Wilson. Patty, hi.
Hello, Stu. How are you doing this afternoon?
It's been a long work day, but I'm anticipating being highly entertained.
Oh, I hope so. No stress there, huh?
Not at all.
No. Well, I actually wanted to tell some really just unusual and creepy stories. I love telling the stories of people with big hearts and spirits that help people, but there are a collection of my stories that are just really kind of creepy. And so tonight, I don't know, I was in a kind of mood for a creepy story, so I thought we would visit the darker side
All right, all the
tonight.
lights are on. We're good.
Okay. Don't have to climb under the blankets and pull it up over your head just yet. But one of these stories, some of these stories are actually from some of my books, some of them are not. But I just found these stories really difficult. Now, this first story is called The Possession of Etta May, and I knew the people that this story happened to.
Mm.
So when I was growing up, my mother's best friend was a minister's wife, and she is the one who told me this story. It happened to her sister-in-law. So her sister-in-law, when she was a little girl, she became friends with this old lady that lived in town who everybody thought was a witch. I mean, that's what they did. They called her a witch and they said she was weird and what have you. And at first, her mom and dad didn't think too much of it. They thought Etta May was just being a sweetheart, trying to make friends with this poor old lady. But very soon, things got weird. Like Etta May would go to bed and then they would find her out in the alley headed down towards the old lady's house, and then she would be on her way home or to school and just disappear and end up at this old lady's house. And this just kept on going on until her parents were like, there's just something really weird about this whole situation. She stopped being the nice little girl, dutiful that she had always been, and conscientious with her schooling. She was about 9 or 10 years old at the time this all took place. And her older brother, which was my mother's friend's husband, was tasked with picking her up at the grade school and walking her home. And he would talk about how she would just suddenly break away, and he would go to the old lady's house to get her, and she would say, "You just go away. She's mine now. She's mine now. Go away." And it got to the point where the mom and dad decided that they were going to have to put their foot down. So they began transporting Etta May and keeping her away from this old woman by hook or crook. If they had to take her to the store and everywhere they went, they pretty much had her attached to their hips to keep her away. They would sit up at night and kind of watch over her to make sure she didn't get up and disappear in the middle of the night and turn up at this old woman's house. And one night, just around midnight, her mom was finally getting ready to go to bed, and Etta May just started screaming, howling, clawing at the air, and coming up off the bed. Her mother came running, tried to calm her down, and she was screaming, "She's mine, she's mine. You can't have her now. Do you hear me? She's mine, she's mine." And her voice wasn't quite her own, if you know what I'm saying. Well, her mother gathered her up in her arms and was sitting on the bed holding her. She didn't look like she was awake. Anybody who's ever seen a person who is sleepwalking would know what I'm talking about. They have vacant eyes, empty eyes. My oldest son was that way. He would sleepwalk and you knew he wasn't awake, like he wasn't in there at that moment. And that's how Etta May looked that night. Well, finally her mom calmed her down and she laid back down. And at that point, the little girl suddenly seemed to become more herself. And she said, "Mommy, the old lady died." And she said, "Oh, no, honey, I'm sure she's not dead." She's like, "No, she died. She died just now." And she's like, again, "I'm sure, honey, it's all fine. You just had a nightmare." And Etta couldn't be consoled. And she said, "She told me that when she died, I would get her powers, and they're here with me now." And she said it almost like it was a sad thing, and she was not happy about it at all, but it was just the way it was going to be. And that began the truly bizarre part of this story. So from that point forward, Etta May was a completely different person. People today might call her a schizophrenic. She would talk to people that weren't there. She would fight with them. she would disappear out of a locked room, and suddenly, she would be elsewhere in the house or down the street or what have you. And the strangest part of all was that there would be sometimes a male voice in the room with her. And when they would go into the room, there would be nobody there but Etta Mae. And this voice was a deep male voice. And it was almost like both voices were coming out of her throat at the same time. It was terrifying. Her folks took her to doctors. They had her prayed over. They did everything they could humanly think of as parents to help this little girl. But she grew up getting worse and worse. She would have periods of time where she would be fine. She had a relationship a couple times. She ended up having a couple children. But eventually this would all come back out in her, and she would always say it was the old lady. And this culminated in the story that I tell in one of the books. And so this is the story. My mother's friend, whose first name was Connie, had been called by her mother-in-law, Etta Mae's mother. She's now an old woman, and she said Etta Mae was in a bad place, which means that Etta Mae could be violent, and she would go after her mom, and she would try to hurt her. Sometimes she'd tell her she was going to kill her. And so Connie's mother-in-law would lock herself in the bedroom and call for help when this would happen. And Etta Mae is now in her 30s, her mid-30s. And they had had lots of experiences. She could sit in a church and she would turn around and leer at people. And it was just very unnerving. People that didn't even know her would say you wanted to squirm away from her gaze. It was almost like triumphant, like, do you think this is going to bother me, shaman? I'm stronger than that. That kind of an attitude and that look, So on this day, my mom's friend, Connie, got this call. She was like, oh my God, Mom, I'm on my way. And so she came and she picked up her mother-in-law, who had snuck out the back door, and met her behind the backyard because she didn't want to annoy and antagonize Etta Mae, who was now in her own room. At the same time, this was all going on, before she had gotten in the car, Connie had called her husband and said, your sister's at it again. You better get to the house and calm her down. And I'm going to get your mother. So she gets her mother-in-law in the car, and just as they pull around from the back of the house up to the front to the road, Etta Mae comes bursting out of the house screaming, I'm going to kill that bitch. I'm going to kill that bitch. She's just insane. And she starts chasing the car like a mad person. Well, Connie hits the gas and she speeds away. Her children are in the back seat, terrified. Her mother-in-law is sitting beside her crying. She's got her hair disheveled. Her clothes are untidy. She had wrestled with Etta Mae at some point. And Etta Mae is running down the highway as fast as she can, right behind them. And Connie rounds up the corner, and she gets up the street a ways, and she says, Mom, where were you headed? What do you want to do? And she's like, get me to the bank. I think I need to get money out because I might not be able to go home tonight. I might need to stay in a motel. Now, you have to remember, this story is at least 50 years old now. The woman's in her 70s now, and she's still alive. And or 40 years old at least. And so Connie runs the red lights, and she just, she's hurrying. She's taking those yellow lights she never would take, and taking shortcuts and cutting through parking lots, trying to get as far away from this whole mess as possible and get her mother-in-law to the bank and then over to her house, at Connie's house, till her husband and his brothers go to the house and take care of Etta Mae, which could mean anything from talking to her to having her committed. And just as she pulls around to where the bank is at, her mother-in-law screams, oh, sweet Jesus. And she looks up, and there's Etta Mae coming right at her. Now, I want you to understand, this woman crossed the city in almost the exact same amount of time as a person driving and running the red lights. And she crossed it on foot. She's disheveled. She's, she's all messed up, and she's still coming. So Connie pulls out of the bank's, parking lot, takes off down the road, and just keeps going. She doesn't really know what else to do but just stay on the highway and stay away from where Etta Mae could get them. So she keeps going. Finally, she pulls into a parking lot a couple miles away and gets out and uses a payphone. This was before cell phones were popular, and calls her husband. He's not answering. So she decides to go to the church where her husband worked, and they would lock themselves into the church office and wait. And from there, she could call back to the house to check to see if Etta Mae was back at the house and maybe reach out to her husband. But whatever happened, she could reach out from that spot, and it was more secure. So she did. Later on, she would find that what happened was that her husband had gone to his mom's house, and Etta Mae was in the bedroom, and she was sitting there talking to herself. And she was saying, you know, you need to kill her. She hears this male voice, and he hears this male voice, and it says, you know, you need to kill her. I told you, none of this is going to go away until you kill her. It's all her fault. She wouldn't let you go with me. She wouldn't just give you up. And he's hearing this male voice, and it was so loud and so clear. And he's hearing his sister's voice answering it as he's standing outside her bedroom door. He's convinced there's a man in that house, in that room with her. He pushes open the door quickly, hoping to catch this person. And she turns around, and both voices talk at the same time, the male and the female voice. And they both say, what do you want? She belongs to us now.
Yeah, you're right. It's creepy. Yeah.
It is creepy. Mm-hmm. It's extremely creepy. And it's really creepy whenever you realize you know the people that it happened to. I've actually met the woman. And she was placed in a mental facility for a little while. The interesting thing about her stays in the mental facilities is that as soon as she was in there, she was perfectly nice. She became this very nice, rational person, and then she would get out, and then it would start all over again, as though whatever it was had the cunning to know it had to retreat so that it could get her freedom, so she could, you know, get out and do whatever it is they wanted her to do again. So she, over the course of her lifetime, she lost custody of her children because of this. She struggled her whole life, and it never ended. To this day, it still continues. And it's a very creepy story, and it's most creepy because it's not a story you read in a book. I mean, I've written about it, but it's not just a story you read in a book. I knew these people.
So any idea why the voice said she belongs to us, plural?
Yes, I suspect that more than one entity was attached, that the old woman had entities attached to her. And when she died, she stopped being the host. And these entities, including now the old woman, attached to Etta Mae.
Eventually, Etta Mae is going to run out of room, too.
She is indeed, and I don't know what they're going to do at that point. She has been carefully watched and unable to groom a child. As I said, she lost custody of her own children, so she's never really been able to have that kind of intimate relationship to do whatever it was the old woman did that drew her in the beginning.
Frightening to think about.
It is frightening, but it's also a story that truly did happen. And I know sometimes I tell stories that are really scary, and people are like, oh, I don't know that I want to hear that spooky stuff. But I will tell you, one of the reasons I tell them, I do like a scary story. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm a ghost story writer. Of course I like spooky stories. But the other reason I tell them is because there are people that are living through stuff like this, and they're always alone with their stuff. They're either afraid because they're going to get locked up, or they're uncomfortable in some way, frightened that their family's going to think they're crazy or something like that. And so they don't have anyone to tell, and they feel like they're the only one in the world it happened to. And so by hearing the story, and I didn't tell it in a particularly creepy manner, I just really presented the facts, there will be an opportunity for them to reach out and say, hey, that story, I related to something in that story. Can I talk to you? And by that, we may be able to help somebody.
Yeah, no, I was thinking that, okay, you knew these people, but yeah, I'm thinking this can't be an isolated incident. There has to be more incidents of just like this other places. which is
There are definitely, as an adult, I've dealt with these kind of cases. As a kid, it was just scary. I was like maybe 14 when I heard the story the first time and met her. I met her at church. Again, she came and went in churches and could sit through an entire sermon. She'd just sit there. And every so often, it was bizarre because every so often she would just turn her head really slow and then she'd stare at you. And you felt like you needed to, like something was crawling through you and you just needed to get out of the way. You would watch and people would get up and go to the bathroom, like 3 and 4 and 5 of them, as she shifted her gaze from one person to the next. And I've had that feeling. I've sat in a church, in the back of the church, and she's looked directly at me and you wanted to melt under the pew. It's just a really uncomfortable feeling.
and one I don't think I'd like to experience. Thank you.
Yeah. And I want to say that my job right now is mental health. It's been in the mental health field for many years. I've encountered many people who are paranoid schizophrenics and people who suffer from schizophrenia of all sorts. I've had voices change. I've had multiple personalities, what they now call them DIDs, but multiple personalities, things like that. I've had all of the above. I have never experienced an energy like that other than in a demonic setting.
Okay.
Just because I know people are going to go, well, she just was mentally ill and nobody understood. But I do that for a living today.
No, but to hear two voices of different genders simultaneously, from what you were saying.
Yes, at the same time is what Bill said.
Yeah, that's that's a bit out of the ordinary. I think that's not schizophrenia.
No, not at all. It's a completely different thing. So, and that's one of the stories. The next story I wanted to share was another one that was in one of my older books, and it's also kind of an illustrative story that I want to talk a little bit about the Ouija board, because it is something that a lot of people mess with. They have Ouija boards that are Barbie doll Ouija boards and pink ones and, online ones now that you can use your phone for and all kinds of craziness. There's Ouija apps. There's all kinds of craziness. And I've heard 1,000 times, if I've heard once, oh, it's just a game. And sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not. And there is a huge and long history, and we'll delve into all of that in more depth in a whole episode on the Ouija boards. But this story in particular was terrifying. And again, in large part because I knew the players. So my mother used to work for a program when I was a teenager that housed kids that were in custody and going to go to like juvenile detention facilities. But this was the place they stayed until they were sentenced and sent somewhere. So kind of like a detention center of its own. It was run by a guy who really wanted to do some good, and he was a really nice man, and he was very well to do. And he had built it to be kind of like a cross between a home and a dormitory. So on the top second floor, he had 2 wings, and one was the boys' wing and one was the girls' wing. But on the first floor, it was really very much like a home with a big rec room and a big TV room with a giant TV, the biggest TV I'd ever seen at that point in my life. And, a dining room and a kitchen, and the kids had chores, and he just tried to make it as normal as he could possibly make it. My mother had a friend who was rather new agey and witchy, and I don't know how else to explain her. She was a lovely woman, but her stepmother was a witch and brought her up as a witch. She left that all behind, but she had a penchant, if you will, for paranormal stuff. So on a cold November night, which was Saturday night, was pizza night. Every Saturday night was pizza night, and the kids would help make big pizzas, and they'd all sit around and play games and what have you. She brought a Ouija board, and some of the kids sat in the dining room and played with the Ouija board along with this woman, while the rest of them were out in the kitchen getting things prepped to make the pizza. And the story that came off of the Ouija board was that there was this guy, and his name was Jean-Luc, and he was a mulatto, meaning half white and half a different race, and half black, and that he was a pirate captain from New Orleans in the mid-1800s, and that he wanted to talk to her in particular. And and it got really kind of creepy, and the kids were getting really intent into the story, and they started with the "you're pushing it," "no, I'm not pushing it, you are," and then the planchette, that's the part that moves, shot out from underneath all their hands and went to the letters that spelled out the words, "I want to talk to you." And so that's a lot of letters to move. And they're all standing there with their hands off the board at this point, or sitting there with their hands off the board. And then the planchette shot off of the table. And at that point, things just, this eerie feeling came over the room. So the lady puts the board away, and she's like, "Well, that was interesting. I don't know how that all happened, but we're just going to leave it go." And she's putting the pieces back together and trying to like blow it off, you know? And then as that's happening in the kitchen, there's this thud, there's this scream, and two of the boys, now these are kids that are street thugs at the time. Like one of them was there for aggravated assault. He tried to kill his mom's boyfriend. They're tough kids. And the other kid, they come flying out of the room that was the pantry. It was a big room filled with shelves. And they're screaming, "There's a black dude in the pantry. There's a black dude in the pantry. He's got a ring in his ear. He looks like a freaking pirate." And like, they're hysterical. So the kids look at this lady, and this lady looks at the kids, and nobody's had time to talk to anybody else. So the people in the kitchen shouldn't know that. They're 2 rooms away. And if you're in the pantry, you're 3 rooms away, because it's the kitchen, then the pantry on the other far side of it. So she gets up and she goes to the kitchen, and at about that point, one of the metal sets of shelves goes crashing over, and all the canned goods go tumbling, and there's nobody in the room with them. So the 2 house parents is what they were called, the 2 house parents, my mom's friend and the gentleman who was working for the boys section, blow it off. "Oh, it must have been, it was overbalanced. We had too many cans on one side." They came up with excuses and finished the pizza, and everybody went to bed. Well, there is a ghost story attached to this property of a little girl who died of a childhood illness, and supposedly haunts the main house, which is right up the hill from where the facility was. And the facility was 2 floors. There was no porches, no balconies, no anything. So it's just straight sides, like a box of crackers laying on its side. It's the easiest way to picture it. That's exactly what it looked like. A box of crackers laying on its side. Double doors in the front, and that was the living section there. And then the kids slept in the 2 wings at the ends. And about 2 in the morning, my mother gets a phone call. My mother was a domestic missionary and very religious, and it's this woman, and she's crying, and she's like, "Oh my God, Peggy, you got to come now. You got to come. There's a little girl, and she's outside the window." And she's making no sense to my mother, but my mom could hear that they were frightened. Well, she woke us up, piled us into the car, and took us with her to this facility, because I guess she was afraid to leave us alone that night for some reason.
Oh yeah, you're not going to leave your kids abandoned in your house in case something happens to you. Yeah.
Well, I mean, like at that time, I was probably 14 or 15, so like technically, I probably could have stayed by myself, but my sister would have been about 12. So she piles us in the car and takes us with her, and we get there, and they tell us to go lay down in the rec room and watch TV. And my mom goes upstairs, and my mom comes back downstairs about 45 minutes later, and she's really upset, and she says, "Pat, go get my Bible." So I go out. My mom always had her Bible with her. It was like most women have a pocketbook. My mom had this Bible, and it came in a little carrying case, and where she went, it went.
My mom had both. Yeah.
Well, she had both, but always.
No, I mean, yeah, the Bible was always in the pocketbook. Oh.
Yeah. My mom actually had a special bag built that had handles for her to take it with her, and it actually fit over the Bible and was part of the Bible covering. But anyway, I ran out and I got it, and then she hoofed it back upstairs, and I could hear kids crying, and I could hear screaming. And basically what happened was that after this woman put the children to bed, 2 of the girls heard what sounded like scratching outside their window. Now remember, it's a sheer drop, 2 floors. And the one girl rolled over to tell the other girl, "Stop screwing around. It's already been a creepy night." And that's when she realized the other girl was nowhere near the window. And beyond that, because there were sheer little curtains, you could see a girl standing. and she was scratching at the window pane as if to say, "Let me in." Well, both girls went howling out into the hallway, as I would have at that point too. And we're telling this crazy ass story, and then the woman went in and she saw it, and then three of the other girls came running. They saw it, and about the time it disappeared from in front of the area where they were at, all of a sudden all hell broke loose in the boys section, and boys came tumbling out, teenage boys screaming, "There's a girl at our window, there's a girl at our window, oh my God, there's a little girl at our window." So whatever it was kind of just having fun playing with scaring everybody. And my mother went up there and she was doing prayers and calming everybody down, and she got whatever it was to leave. But it took about 2 weeks of my mom going out nightly before it finally ended and stopped. But I honestly believed on that night that they contacted an entity, and it presented itself in various ways. First, it was this Jean-Luc guy, because that was romantic and the kids were intent on it, and they were feeding it energy because they were listening so intently. And then it used fear for a while, and then it shifted into a little girl, which would be terrifying, standing in the air, 10 feet up, looking in your window. So I think they actually woke something up that haunted them for about, like I said, about 2 weeks. My mom went down every night for 2 weeks, sat down there at night and did prayers. She anointed the kids. Anything she had to do to make the kids stop being afraid.
You had mentioned before that non-human entities, when they're imitating human, something's not quite right. So did anybody notice, other than, like levitating up to a second floor window, anything other that made it manifest, or did we not have that kind of detail?
The only detail I remember, and it's a significant one, is that some of the kids said that her eyes were black, and others were like, no, they were just in shadow. So that's a possibility. But this happened in the late at night, and there weren't any lights on, and it was backlit because the pole lights were on outside. This facility's out in the woods, and which made it harder for kids to run away because they tell them things like there are bears in the woods, and and so it was one of the easiest ways to keep the kids behaving. And but I definitely, yes, usually there's always a flaw. They can't mimic a human being perfectly. So if there was anything that the detail was sketchy, but the thing I remember was a couple of the kids were really afraid of her eyes. They said her eyes were just terrifying, which doesn't shock me considering. But it was interesting that whatever it was, it actually took the story that was at the facility and used it as part of whatever its scam was. Because the story is about a little girl who died and came back and haunted the property. But she wasn't creepy or anything. She was just a little girl who came back to where she was last loved. So, that's how some of those stories work. Third one I'd like to tell you is also from one of the books, and it's a story again that is familiar to me, and the people that involved in the story are familiar to me. So there was a house in my hometown of Williamsburg. It still exists to this day. And a relative by marriage rented the house. This is their story. A lot of these big old houses had these kitchens with 10-foot high ceilings and cabinets filled in the wall that went from the ceiling to the floor. You know what I'm talking about?
I do. Yep.
And it was a nice house. It was big and airy, 3 stories high. They had turned the attic area into like a rec room for the kids. The only flaw was that there was a half wall at the top of the stairs. And it was in the game plan to eventually make it a full wall and build it in all the way so nobody could fall over it. But it was like 5 feet high. You had to try hard, and the kids were decent kids. They didn't mess with it. But over the first few weeks they were living in the house, stuff started to happen. Things went missing. They would hear somebody walking in the kitchen, like a child's footsteps, go down expecting one of their kids. Nobody would be there. And then one day it just got plain creepy. So woman is that rented the house. She was in the kitchen. A neighbor came over to visit, and the lady that was running the house went upstairs, excused herself, and went upstairs because her baby, her newborn baby, was crying, and she needed to go get her. So the other lady is sitting in the kitchen drinking a cup of tea, just kind of doodle bopping, waiting for her to come back down the stairs in a few seconds. And that's whenever one of the cabinets, the bottom cabinets, clicked open. It had one of those little metal latches. And no big deal. It could be just that it wasn't latched quite tightly enough and it clicked open when a truck went by or whatever. She's not totally terrified, but she's really got her attention now. And the door swings open and out crawls a little girl about 8 years old. And the little girl stands up. She's in clothes that look like early 1900s. And she looks at this woman and tries to say something, but nothing comes out. And she looks angry or upset. And at just that moment, the lady upstairs comes down with the baby. The little girl looks at the stairs and then runs back, climbs into the cabinet, and pulls the door shut after her and is gone. Well, you can imagine the next conversation. You know, this woman's terrified. She's like, oh my God, are you babysitting? What's going on? There's a kid in the cabinet. And they open the cabinet and they look in, and there's nothing in there but dishes. No place for anybody to go. They pull the the dishes out and pull the shelving out and are trying to figure out if somebody could like get back in there somehow, because it was half of a double house and maybe somebody came in from the other side, but there were no children living in the other side of the house. So that was the first time she was seen. After that, the haunting escalated. People would talk about seeing this little girl glaring at them when they would go upstairs. The lady that rented the house, it got so bad she finally went through the house and said prayers to try to make it better. The kids decided they didn't want to go up to the third floor anymore because they said the little girl was up there and she would hurt them, like she would hit them or pinch them or stuff like that. So the woman finally got some sage and went through the whole house and blessed the house. And for about a week or two, things calmed down. But they had some company come over, extra kids and what have you. And the kids had just begun going back upstairs to play in the attic because nothing had been happening for those last couple weeks. And they were told, take the other kids and go upstairs and have fun. There's all kinds of toys up in the attic to play with. So dutifully, the kids go traipsing up the stairs. And the kids range in age from about 9 or 10 to like 5 amongst them. And they're up the stairs, and then for a little bit there's quiet, and then all of a sudden there's a scream and this terrible sick thud, and the people that rented the house like froze. They're, oh my God, somebody fell over that half wall. So they all go bolting up the stairs, and there's a little boy about 5 years old, and he's laying on the steps and he's crying, he's winded, and he's pointing up the stairs. And the other kids are gathered at the opening to the staircase. And of course, the people that live there, the lady there, she said, my God, what happened? And the oldest little girl, about 9 years old, she's like, that mean girl pushed him over the wall. And they're like, what mean girl? And they look up, and there stands that same ghostly child leaning over the wall, grinning at that little boy who's laying there with his broken arm. And she faded away, and they all saw her. And that was the last that the children ever went to the attic. They made arrangements and they moved out of the house.
Understandable on all counts.
Yes, very much so. There's just, so many times that we don't realize what's going on, and it's one of those things. So my next story is, it's called The Angry House, and it's a story that was really well researched by a paranormal investigator of great renown. His name was Christopher Chacon. You can look him up on the internet. During the 70s and early 80s, he was one of the premier paranormal investigators in the world. Worked out of Berkeley University, and he was phenomenal at what he did. He was
And
one of about 3 or 4 serious, actually credentialed paranormal investigators. They do not credential paranormal investigators today and call them parapsychologists any longer. But he was a parapsychologist, went to college, studied the subject, and had a degree. And I've always been vastly interested in Christopher Chacon and a couple of the other men who were there. And this is a story about a place he went. And you can look up the actual video with real footage online because it still exists. The documentary series was like My Haunted Life or Their Haunted Lives. Haunted Lives is the name of it, of the series. There's 3 sets of shows hosted by Leonard Nimoy, and then the later ones were hosted by Stacy Keach. But they still exist. You can find them on YouTube. And this is one of my favorite stories ever, just because it was so well documented. So basically what happened was there was a young couple who moved into this beautiful house in Southern California. It was gorgeous, swimming pool, you know, sunny, beautiful place. And they were very much in love, a good, happy marriage until they move in. And then this miasma kind of comes over them and they start being critical of each other and hateful of each other. And when they're in the house, they're bickering and fighting and bickering and fighting and fighting and bickering and over stupid stuff. Who put the dishes away? Why did you leave that glass on the sink? Just tiny little details, things that most people would just blow off, you know? And it got to the point with one day where the wife, her name was Sharon, I believe, she was holding a knife, a butcher knife. And she said, I really felt a desire to stab him, to kill him. And he turned around and walked out. And that was the interesting thing. Once they got outside, they would realize what they were doing. And they were like, oh my God, I don't know why I just said that to you. I'm so sorry. And this continued on and on. At the same time, objects were beginning to move in the house. The doors to the house, to the cabinets in the kitchen, would open and close on their own, and they would come home and she would be angry because, why did you not close any of the cabinet doors before we left? And he'd be like, I didn't even let them open, you know, and stupid stuff. But it would escalate well beyond anything that normally would happen in a relationship. And one day they were bickering, fighting, bickering, fighting, bickering, fighting, and they were eating outside on their patio. So she was going in and out of the house. She would go in the house and then she'd start screaming at him. You know, why can't you help me more? Why won't you do this? And just really angry. And she'd come out with the stuff and slam it down on the table. And then she'd say, I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm so sorry. I apologize. And he's like, I'll go in and help you. And then she'd head for the door and then she'd go, no, just sit there like you always do. And it was just one of those situations. And he's watching this thinking, oh my God, it's like 2 different people. So he says something to her about it, and she's like, you're crazy. Well, it all culminates when they go to work. They're traveling to work together. And, you know, in Southern California in the winter can get a little chilly. And I say that tongue in cheek because we get below 0 and they get 50. But to them, that's chilly. And they had the heat on so that the heat would kick on, if, you know, in the evening before they got home a little bit and take the chill off the house because the heat was off all day. And it was in the 40s or 50s there at the time. They get home and they're talking, and they're actually to the point now where they're talking about, maybe we need to get a divorce. This isn't working because it's been so many fights. And they get to the house, they pull up, and he's like, I thought you turned off all the lights. We can't afford this. And every light in the house is on. And she's screaming, I didn't leave them on. You're the one who doesn't care about how big the bills are and blah, blah, blah. And they get out of the car and they go in the house, and the heat hits them and it's palpable. Somebody has turned the heat up as high as it'll go. And that house is cooking hot. So they get over to the heat, they turn the heat off, they start to yell at each other, and they're arguing about who did what to who, and, you know, who left it on and who did this and whatever. And finally he's like, shh. She's like, what? He's like, come on, we're leaving. And they went into the, it was like a little den, and they could go out through that doorway on the other side of the den and outside. It was a quicker way to escape. He shuts the door, and at that point, the shadow kind of looms up out of the door, like through the door itself. And he backs up, and he yells at her, get the door open, get the door open, get the door open, we got to go, meaning the other door that goes out onto the patio. And as she does, whatever it is picks him up and throws him through the door and smashes through the door itself, not the doorway, and smashes his face. He has his orbital socket broken, his nose was broken, his jaw was broken. He was badly battered. She drags him out, and they get out of there. They call for help, and they just simply never go back to the house ever again. So this is when the homeowner, the person that they were leasing the house from, contacts Berkeley University, and Chris Chacon goes in. He wires the house and puts all these cameras in it, and then he sits outside in a van, has people on all angles monitoring the property several days and nights, so nobody can go in without their knowledge. And the footage is amazing. I really highly recommend you look for it. I'll look for it myself and try to give you a link to attach, so it'll be easier for folks. And what he sees is it's so amazing. It's a black shadow figure, just like you would a classic black shadow. It materializes in a hallway, goes down the hallway, past the camera, goes through the door. The door opens in front of it and closes. The next camera picks it up, and it continues moving. And then in the kitchen, there's a camera stationary on a tripod, and it's just kind of a wide view of the kitchen, the cabinets, the sink, the whole 9 yards. And all of a sudden, something bumps the camera as though something bumped into it. There's a lot of static suddenly, and the picture frames out again and looks normal. And then the cabinet doors and drawers start opening, closing madly. And you can see this all happening in real time. And then whatever it is hits the camera again and smashes it. And then there's a third piece of footage in what was one of the bedrooms. There's it's like a TV chair you would sit on the floor to play video games with. And it's sitting there, and there's a roll of tape and a couple other things in this chair. And all of a sudden the chair starts to vibrate, and the tape jumps off the chair and starts rolling down the floor all by itself, as though somebody's like rolling it along. It's amazing footage. It's some of the best I've ever seen. And it's a really strange house because, well, they're not the only people who've had really negative experiences in the house. There's no explanation for this house. None. Nobody's ever come forward and said, hey, there were murders in this house, or the house was built on land where such and such happened. The house just was nasty, and nobody knows to this day why. But I definitely will. I think I have it saved, and I will try to give you the link so you can watch it yourself, and then post it for everybody else to watch. It's a fascinating piece of footage. It just is. There's no way around it. So I'm just going to tell one more story tonight and let it go, because I don't think we need to focus too much on the negative. But I wanted to tell these stories because I wanted people to know that these things happen. And this is a story that is also from an old book, and I have to tell you, this story does something to kids. I did not mean for it to be that way. The first thing I learned about writing is that I never know what stories are going to capture the reader. Like, this story literally was a piece of filler. I needed 30 more pages of ghost stories. I came across it. It seemed innocuous enough, and I thought, oh, it's a nice little ghost story. I'll tuck it in. It's a little creepy. And but here's the story. So this story was actually found in a journal written by a doctor who actually attended the child that's in question. So basically what happened is that there was this family who rented this house in the Roaring Spring, Pennsylvania area. And the house had 3 bedrooms. It had a huge bedroom, a middle-sized bedroom, and a very small one. It was almost a closet. And they had 3 sons, so the boys got the big bedroom. And a little girl, she got the smallest room, and the mom and dad and the newborn baby took the middle-sized room. And the dad was a bit of a jerk, and he drank a little too much, so he could get really cranky, if you will. And the little girl was never fussy. She wasn't that kind of kid. She was about 6, 7 years old, and they moved in. She did not like that room from the very first night she stayed there. She kept saying there was a mean man in the room and the mean man was going to hurt her, and she would cry. Her mom tried to quiet her down. Her dad was getting more agitated. And this went on night after night after night. And the mom tried everything from singing her to sleep to laying down in bed with her till she fell asleep. And still, the little girl would wake up screaming, the mean man's in here. The mean man's going to hurt me. Hurry, let me out, let me out. And the woman began to believe that something really was happening because this child was terrified. I mean, really petrified. So Dad was getting also, furious. He was to the point where he was done with it, having his sleep disrupted, and her being a brat is what he said it was. She's just a baby. You're babying her all the time, and blah, blah, blah. And he would go after his wife. Well, one night he got drunk, and the little girl cried and screamed, and he went over and he locked her in the bedroom. And they could hear her on the other side pounding on the door, begging to get out. And her mom was begging to get her out. And he was like, no, absolutely not. I'm done with this. Now she'll have to spend the night in there, and then she'll see nothing happens, and then it's going to be fine. So he takes the key and he puts it in his pillow, and he goes to bed, and he passes out. There's no way to get that key. None whatsoever. That's not going to wake him up. And that would not be good for any of them, and the mom knew it. So she waited till just about daylight, woke him up at that point and said, I need her to come down and help me get breakfast ready. Give me the key. And he threw the pillow at her, and she got the key. She went in the room. It was silent. It had been silent for hours. And when she came in, at first she thought the little girl was on the floor because there was bedding on the floor. She picked the bedding up, and the bed was kind of askew away from the wall. And the little girl wasn't in there, and she wasn't puzzled. And that's when she kind of stepped into the shadows and realized that the little girl had wedged herself somehow back in behind the bed as if trying to hide. And she was hiding behind the headboard of the bed, but she wasn't moving. And the woman screamed and got help, and everything went crazy for a little bit. They ran for a doctor. A neighbor ran for the doctor, and he came, and the little girl was dead. And that's when he heard the story for the first time, the story that he penned in his journal. And then he penned his conclusion. Whatever was there had been so terrifying that when it completely revealed itself, it frightened her to death, literally. And he believed, and he said in his journal, that she had died of fright. And it always made, that story stuck with me my whole life. And I have 3 boys and grandkids, and I would always give them the benefit of the doubt if they said they were frightened. I wrote that story 20-some years ago. And I would always, what's the harm in them going to sleep on the couch or come to sleep with me or whatever? What's the harm, I would say? Because how many times do things appear to children that we don't see? And how many times does it terrify them? And all the grown-ups blow it off. And just as bad as being terrified is being disbelieved. When you're 7 years old or 8 years old and something terrible happens to you, it's real. And when your grown-ups tell you it's not and they blow it off, you have nowhere else left to go.
No, that makes you wonder that, are they ever going to believe me?
Yeah, and so I have to say, I was a soft touch for those things. I would be like, okay, come on, sleep with mommy. Mommy will keep you safe. Or, we'll go sleep on the couch and I'll hold you tonight. And as you know from us being friends, there were a few things that happened in my children's lifetime that were really frightening. And I hope that they can at least say I took them seriously.
Yeah, I do recall reading that story in your book. And so as soon as you started telling it, of course I knew, but I love to hear you tell stories.
Oh, thank you. Years and years ago, I did a speaking gig at the Roaring Spring Library, and they had stuck me in a room originally up on the 3rd floor, and it was like maybe 15 people. And then 45 minutes before the thing was to start, we were moved down to the 1st floor where we could hold like 40 people. And then they were like, oh, there's so many people who've come. Like, we're gonna have to take it outside. They have this big wraparound porch, and you're gonna have to stand on the sidewalk. And the porch was just filled, and they drug every chair in the building out for people to sit in, and people were on the steps and what have you. And there was this little girl, and she was there with, I would come to find, her aunt. She was about 11, and I'm standing out there on the sidewalk doing my thing, and I keep hearing this little girl and seeing this little girl in my periphery, and she's like to her aunt, "Is she gonna tell it? Oh, she's got to tell it. Oh, I hope she tells it." And she's like jumping up and down, and the aunt's like, "Shh, be quiet, stop that. You're disturbing people." And all I'm thinking as I'm telling the story is, what story does she want this badly, And then she said something that kind of gave me the clue. It was this story. And so I kind of finished up the story I'm on, and I roll it around, and I said, not only are places far away and distant haunted, but places that we live in, like here in this town, it's haunted as well. And I started into this story, and the minute she realized it was a story, she looked like somebody had done a touchdown. She erupts off her chair. She's screaming, "Yes, yes, 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 yes." I don't think I've ever had anybody compliment me on a story better than that little girl. And afterward, her aunt came to apologize, and I was like, "Oh, please do not." That was like the highlight of my year, to have somebody love my storytelling that much, that they were so excited. And every time I tell that story, even though I know it's a sad and tragic story, in the back of my head, I hear that little 11-year-old girl and how excited she was to hear that story one more time. And I thought, like I said, we'd just visit the dark side a little tiny bit. We'll go some other places in the upcoming weeks and bounce back and forth a little bit. But I hope you enjoyed the stories tonight, Stu.
I did. And if any of our viewers and or listeners are also just as exuberant and excited about that, please give us click a like down below on this video if you're watching it on YouTube. Our YouTube channel, theparanormalistpodcast.com, our Facebook page. Again, we're inching toward that 500 mark, so we'd like to see that happen. That's also the Paranormalist Podcast, and you may email at paranormalist@theparanormalistpodcast.com. And we'd really, really, really love to hear your stories. I mean, up to this point, I think we've had very few people take that opportunity to us. So, but it's there for you, and please do email us. Let us know.
Yeah, we've had a couple people ask some questions, and we've had a few stories, some that I plan to use in upcoming episodes, and I'll reach out to the people beforehand to make sure it's okay. But yeah, we're growing by leaps and bounds. I cannot believe in the last little while how fast people have been coming in. But it's more fun if you guys talk to us, so please do so.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, then I wish you a good evening, Stu, and to all of our listeners as well.
Thanks, Patty.